Have you ever faced a moment so shattering, so utterly devastating that it felt like the very ground beneath your feet had disappeared? A moment where everything you believed in, everything you built your life around, crumbled into dust before your very eyes. Imagine the weight of that betrayal, the gut-wrenching realization that the person you trusted most had been meticulously dismantling your world, brick by brick, right under your nose. This isn't just a story about infidelity. It's a raw, visceral journey through the landscape of human trust, the crushing blow of betrayal, and the phoenix-like rise from the ashes. It's about a woman named Zara, whose life was not just disrupted but systematically demolished by the man she loved, only for her to discover a hidden reservoir of strength, a dormant empire, and a path to justice far more potent than mere revenge. We begin in a scene of domestic horror, a tableau that has haunted countless hearts throughout history, yet remains uniquely agonizing for each individual who experiences it. Zara, a woman who poured 5 years of her life and love into her marriage, returned home one afternoon with grocery bags heavy with ingredients for her husband Brandon's favorite meal. Perhaps she was humming a tune or mentally running through her to-do list, anticipating a quiet evening of shared comfort. But what awaited her was not comfort nor quiet. It was an inferno of infidelity, burning brightly in the sanctuary of her own bedroom. The silk sheets, chosen with such care for an upcoming anniversary, were indeed tangled, but not around the bodies they were intended for. Brandon's hands, those hands she had intertwined with her own, now gripped the hips of his secretary, Rachel. The afternoon sun, usually a gentle, golden presence, seemed to mock Zara, illuminating every excruciating detail of their intertwined forms, etching the scene into her memory with the permanence of a scar. Her world, in that instant, shattered. The sound of their pleasure, a symphony of her undoing, filled the room, deafening her to everything else. This was her home, her bed, her husband, and now it was nothing. Many of us can recall moments when our reality warped, when the familiar became terrifyingly alien. For Zara, that shift was triggered by Rachel's moans, her red hair spread across Zara's pillow like a splash of spilled blood, a visceral, unsettling image that screamed violation. Brandon's response was lost, subsumed by the thundering beat of Zara's own heart, a drumroll to her destruction. She couldn't breathe, couldn't think, could only bear witness to the obliteration of every foundation she had built her life upon. This is the insidious nature of betrayal. It doesn't just break a bond, it incinerates the very fabric of your perception, making you question every shared glance, every whispered promise, every single memory you thought was real. A humble can of tomatoes, dislodged from a fallen grocery bag, rolled across the hardwood floor. The hollow sound, almost pathetic in its simplicity, was enough to break the suffocating spell. 2 heads snapped towards the doorway. Rachel screamed, scrambling for the sheets, her modesty a flimsy shield against the enormity of her discovery. But Brandon? Brandon merely stared, his eyes devoid of shame, regret, or even a flicker of the love that once supposedly defined them. "Zara," he stated, his voice chillingly calm, "we need to talk. Talk." The word, a cruel parody of intimacy, emerged as a barely audible whisper from Zara's throat, which felt like sandpaper. He wanted to talk after this premeditated, callous act of emotional violence? Rachel, gathering her clothes with a furtive haste, mumbled about leaving, but her tone lacked contrition. It was the irritation of someone caught in an inconvenience, not the horror of a woman witnessing the unraveling of another's life. "No," Brandon interjected, still fixated on Zara. "Stay. She needs to hear this anyway." The sheer audacity of his command, the breathtaking lack of empathy, would have brought most people to their knees. Zara's legs indeed felt like they might give out. 7 years, 5 years of marriage, a lifetime, it felt like, of devotion. She had shelved her own career aspirations to bolster his business, cooked his meals, laundered his clothes, charmed his clients, loved him with every fiber of her being. And this was the curtain call. "How long?" Zara managed to ask, her voice raw. Brandon's nonchalant shrug was another stab. "Does it matter?" he asked, swinging his legs over the side of the bed, reaching for his pants as if this were a mundane morning discussion. "Look, Zara, this isn't working anymore. It hasn't been working for a long time." The audacity, the gaslighting, the sheer cruelty of it all was overwhelming. "Answer me," she insisted, a desperate plea for a shred of truth. Rachel, her movements quick and nervous, started to protest. "Brandon, maybe I should—" "2 years." He cut her off, his voice flat. "Maybe longer. I don't keep track." 2 years. For 2 years, while Zara had pored over future plans, he had meticulously engineered his exit. While she had been a bastion of unwavering love and loyalty, he had woven a tapestry of lies, day after deceitful day. And then, as casually as if discussing the weather, he dropped the final bombshell. "I want a divorce. I've already talked to a lawyer. You can keep your car, but the house is in my name. The business, too. You know how these things work." A cold, creeping dread spread through Zara's chest. "The business I helped you build. The house I've been paying half the mortgage on." Her silent protests were met with a dismissive shrug. "Your name isn't on anything that matters," Brandon declared. "I made sure of that." Made sure of that. The chilling echo of his words suggested a calculated, premeditated betrayal, a sinister plot unfolding over years. Every trusting signature she had ever placed on his business documents, every act of faith, a step into his carefully laid trap. It was as if he had been planning this elaborate abandonment from day one. Rachel, now fully dressed, moved towards the door but paused beside Brandon, placing a possessive, claiming hand on his arm. "I'll wait for you downstairs," she announced, pressing a kiss to his cheek. A final, deliberate act of territorial assertion, right there, in front of the woman she had usurped. The sound of Rachel's heels echoing down the stairs sealed the deal. This house, Zara realized, was no longer her home. Brandon, with steady hands that betrayed no tremor of guilt or shred of remorse, fastened his watch around his wrist. No emotion. Nothing. "Pack your things," he ordered. "I want you out by tonight. Rachel's moving in tomorrow." Tomorrow? The word hit Zara like a physical blow. The swiftness of her displacement, the immediate erasure of her presence, was breathtaking. "We're in love, Zara. Real love, not whatever this was." He gestured around the room, a disdainful sweep of his hand, as if their 5 years of marriage had been an unfortunate, regrettable mistake he was now magnanimously correcting. Zara looked at the man she had loved more than her own life, a man she now realized was a complete stranger. A cruel, calculating stranger who had stolen years from her, only to cast her aside like so much refuse. "You're right," she said quietly, a sudden steely resolve settling into her bones. "This isn't working anymore." A flicker of surprise crossed Brandon's face. Perhaps he had anticipated pleas, tears, a fight for his affection. But Zara felt something harder than grief taking root, something sharp, cold, and unyielding. "I'll be gone tonight," she continued, "but Brandon, this isn't over." He laughed, a genuine dismissive laugh. "What are you going to do? You don't have anything, no money, no job, no family. You're nothing without me, nothing." The word, nothing, struck her like a physical slap, yet simultaneously ignited a fierce, burning ember within her chest. She had been nothing to him, that was clear, but she would not be nothing to herself. With a newfound resolve, Zara turned and walked out of the bedroom, not another word wasted on the man who had just dismantled her existence. Behind her, she heard Brandon call Rachel's name, and the echo of their laughter drifting up from downstairs, a macabre soundtrack to her escape. She walked past the framed wedding photos, past the furniture they had lovingly chosen, past the remnants of a life she had believed was real. From his bedroom, their low voices already planning their new life together, the life they had orchestrated in secret while she cooked his dinners, inquired about his day, and swallowed his lies about working late, seeped into the hallway. She grabbed a suitcase from the closet, her hand shaking now, not from sadness, but from a pure, clean, exhilarating rage. It felt better, more invigorating, than the crushing pain of betrayal. Brandon thought she was nothing. He thought he had won. He believed he could simply discard her, an insignificant inconvenience, and sail off into a perfect life with his perfect little secretary. He had no earthly idea what he had just unleashed. The motel room smelled of disinfectant and shattered dreams. 2 months had passed since that horrific afternoon, and Zara sat on the thin bedspread, staring at the divorce papers that had been unceremoniously delivered to her new job at a diner. Brandon, ever efficient in his cruelty, was pushing for the divorce to be final, eager to formalize her erasure. She should have seen it coming, she thought, the neon signs of his disinterest now glaringly obvious in hindsight. The late nights stretching longer, the business trips becoming more frequent, the slow, agonizing withdrawal of his touch, his gaze, his care. The phone in her tiny rented apartment, a temporary stopgap before she fell too far behind on rent, rang constantly. Brandon's lawyer demanding her signature. Rachel had left voice messages too, a hollow apology tinged with the smug assertion that she and Brandon were meant to be, as if destiny itself had conspired to betray and humiliate Zara. She picked up the legal documents again. Brandon's magnanimous offer, $5,000 and her used Honda. After 7 years together, after helping him build his construction company from scratch, after sacrificing her own dreams to prop up his, she would walk away with pocket change and a practical but utterly uninspiring vehicle. The financial insult, though significant, was eclipsed by the profound sense of being erased. Rachel was now ensconced in their house, sleeping in their bed, perhaps even wearing the jewelry Zara had left behind in her desperate dash for freedom. Brandon, a master of performative happiness, posted photos on social media of their new life, a carefully curated narrative where Zara had never even existed. A knock on the door startled her. It was Janet, her co-worker from the diner, a woman whose life experiences had etched wisdom and grit into her very being. "Honey, you in there? You missed your shift." Zara, dragging herself off the bed, opened the door. Janet, a woman who understood the silent language of pain, took one look at Zara's face and pushed past her into the room. "Oh, sweetheart," Janet said, pulling Zara into a hug that smelled comfortingly of coffee and cigarettes. "You can't keep doing this to yourself." The words, when they finally came, were cracked and broken. "I don't know what else to do. I gave him everything, and he just threw me away like I never mattered." Janet sat on the bed, patting the spot next to her. "Listen to me," she said, her voice firm but gentle. "I've been divorced 3 times, so I know what I'm talking about. Men like your ex-husband, they think they're so smart. They think they can use people, throw them away, and nothing will ever come back to bite them." Zara's cynical reply was swift. "But they're right, Janet. Look at me. I'm working at a diner, living in a motel room, and he's living my life with someone else." And Janet's response was immediate and resolute. For now, he's winning. But life has a funny way of turning tables. You just gotta be ready when it does. It was a simple truth, delivered with the weight of experience, a lifeline thrown to a drowning soul. That night, clutching onto Janet's words like a talisman, Zara called the only lawyer in town she could barely afford, Gordon Price. His office, humble and located above a pawn shop, housed a man with kind eyes and a non-judgmental ear. He listened intently to Zara's story, poring over the divorce papers. "Your husband was smart," Gordon conceded, a hint of professional respect for Brandon's cunning in his voice. "He made sure your name wasn't on the house or the business accounts. Legally, he doesn't owe you much." Zara's voice rose, a desperate plea for justice. "I helped build that business. I worked part-time jobs to pay bills while he got it off the ground. I entertained his clients, managed his schedule, did his books in the beginning." "I believe you," Gordon said, his sympathy evident, "but proving it in court would cost more money than you'd likely win. Sometimes the law isn't about what's right. It's about what you can prove." Zara signed the papers that night, not out of acceptance, but out of grim necessity. Brandon's plan had been perfect. He got everything, and she, just as he had promised, got nothing. But as she signed her name for the last time as Zara Patterson, she made herself a new promise. This wouldn't be the end of her story. This would be the beginning. It was a declaration of war, whispered in the quiet solitude of Gordon Price's office, sealed with a pen and a broken heart now hardened into steel. The very next morning, the universe seemed to conspire to test her resolve. She saw Brandon and Rachel at the grocery store, a vision of domestic bliss that twisted the knife in her fresh wound. They were selecting steaks for dinner, laughing, utterly oblivious to the shattered life they had left in their wake. Rachel, with an almost deliberate cruelty, wore a diamond bracelet. Zara instantly recognized it as her own anniversary gift from Brandon 2 years prior. They didn't see Zara standing in the cereal aisle, her cart filled with discount brands and markdown produce, a stark contrast to their overflowing bounty. She watched them, memorizing the casual intimacy of Brandon's hand on Rachel's lower back, the way Rachel leaned into him, utterly convinced she belonged there. "Enjoy it," Zara whispered to herself, the words a silent vow. Enjoy it while it lasts. She didn't know how yet, but someday she would make them understand the full, devastating cost of their actions. Someday, they would pay for every tear she had cried, for every desolate night in that motel room, for every moment of humiliation and pain they had so carelessly inflicted. Brandon thought she was nothing, but nothing, Zara was rapidly discovering, had a way of becoming something when you least expected it. 6 months after the divorce was final, Zara found herself in a studio apartment above Mrs. Chen's bakery, on the other side of town. It wasn't much, a single room with a kitchenette and a bathroom so tiny you could barely turn around. But it was hers. She had paid the deposit with her own hard-earned money, her name etched onto the lease. The apartment smelled of fresh bread and sweet sugar from the bakery below, a fragrant antidote to the clinical, lonely scent of the motel room, Mrs. Chen, a kindly woman with discerning eyes, had given her a deal on the rent in exchange for help on weekends. It wasn't glamorous, but it was honest work. And for the first time in months, Zara felt like she could truly breathe. She had cut her hair short, shedding the long, flowing locks Brandon had always admired. She had stopped wearing makeup, no longer striving to be the agreeable, soft woman Brandon had desired. That woman, she realized, had gotten her heart broken and her life destroyed. The new Zara was different, harder, more careful with her trust, fiercely protective of her heart. The months of struggle had forged a new self. She was stronger than she had ever imagined, capable of working double shifts without complaint, subsisting on ramen noodles and still finding reasons to smile. She could fall asleep in a motel room that reeked of failure and wake up with a renewed, unyielding determination to try again. Janet, her wise friend, had been right about life having a way of turning tables, not through magical intervention, but through small, practical shifts that accumulated over time. Zara saved every penny, a meticulous act of self-preservation. She enrolled in business classes at the community college, devouring every book on finance and investing the library offered. Most importantly, she stopped checking Brandon's social media, ceased torturing herself with images of him and Rachel vacationing in places he had promised to take her. She stopped caring about the life she had lost and began, with fierce intent, to focus on the life she was building. Gordon Price, her humble divorce lawyer, had become more than just legal counsel. He was a friend, a kindred spirit who understood the daunting task of starting over from scratch. He'd occasionally stop by the bakery for coffee and conversation, observing her transformation. "You're different," he remarked one afternoon, sitting at a small table by the window. "Stronger." Zara, wiping down the counter, met his gaze. "I had to get stronger. The old me wouldn't have survived this." Gordon shook his head gently. "The old you was fine. She just trusted the wrong person." This, Zara realized, was the cruel, unspoken truth about betrayal. It didn't just break your heart, it shattered your entire worldview, making you question every assumption about people, about love, about yourself. For months, Zara had grappled with self-doubt, wondering if she had been stupid, blind, or hopelessly naive. But she was slowly coming to understand that trusting wasn't a character flaw. Being unworthy of that trust was. She had opened a new savings account, a clandestine fund Brandon knew nothing about. Every week she deposited money, sometimes a mere $10 or $20, but it was growing, a tangible testament to her newfound autonomy. She had plans now, goals entirely independent of any man or relationship. The community college classes were a revelation, teaching her the arcane language of financial statements, the intricacies of investments, the true mechanisms of business beyond the superficial facade she had witnessed with Brandon's company. Her professor, Dr. Martinez, a sharp, insightful woman, pulled her aside one day. "You have a natural aptitude for this," she had said. "Have you ever considered getting your degree in business?" Zara had laughed, a wry, self-deprecating sound. "I'm 32 years old and working at a diner. I think that ship has sailed." Dr. Martinez's reply was firm, laced with a quiet challenge. "Ships don't sail on their own. Someone has to decide to set them in motion." That night, Zara researched scholarship programs and financial aid, filling out applications not because she believed anything would come of it, but because the very act of trying felt like a powerful counterattack against everything that had been done to her. She was learning to cook for herself, truly cook, not just reheating frozen dinners or rotating through a monotonous trio of meals. She immersed herself in books that had nothing to do with self-improvement for someone else's benefit. She was, for the first time in her adult life, discovering who she was when she wasn't striving to conform to someone else's expectations. The woman reflected in the mirror now looked different, leaner from the physical work and simple meals, more confident in her posture. Her eyes had shed that desperate, pleading quality that had defined them during the last, suffocating year of her marriage. Now they held a steady, determined light. One evening, walking home from her diner shift, she passed a construction site where Brandon's company was erecting a new office building. His truck, a familiar, unwelcome sight, was parked at the site. A part of her, the old, wounded self, yearned to walk over and unleash the torrent of anger she still harbored. But she didn't. Instead, she kept walking, toward her small apartment, toward the life she was meticulously building, one day at a time. Brandon, she realized, belonged to her past. Her gaze was firmly fixed on her future. Little did she know that future was about to change in ways she never could have imagined. The letter arrived on a Tuesday morning in March, delivered by a man in an impeccably tailored suit who seemed utterly out of place standing beside Mrs. Chen's humble bakery. Zara almost dismissed him. She was already running late for her diner shift. But something about his quiet persistence piqued her curiosity. "Miss Zara Johnson?" he inquired, reading from a card. "Yes," she replied cautiously, having reverted to her maiden name after the divorce. "I'm William Foster from Foster Blake and Associates in Chicago. I represent the estate of Theodore Johnson. I believe he was your father." The world tilted. Zara clutched the door frame, struggling to steady herself. Her father, Theodore Johnson, the man who had abandoned her and her mother when she was 12, leaving only a terse note about not being cut out for family life. The man, her mother, who had raised Zara alone, working 2 jobs, never spoke of, save to say they were better off without him. Her mother had died in a car accident when Zara was 25, and Zara had never sought contact with her father. As far as she was concerned, he had made his choice long ago, a choice that had left an indelible scar of absence. "My father is dead?" she whispered, the words barely forming. "I'm very sorry for your loss," Mr. Foster said gently. "May I come in? We have quite a lot to discuss." Now, this impeccably dressed lawyer sat in her tiny apartment, informing her that Theodore Johnson had been one of Chicago's wealthiest men. "I don't understand," Zara repeated for the 3rd time, her mind struggling to process the seismic shift in her reality. "My father left us with nothing. He was a deadbeat who abandoned his family." Mr. Foster opened his briefcase, extracting a thick folder. "Your father built a real estate empire over the past 20 years. Shopping centers, office buildings, apartment complexes. When he died last month, his estate was valued at approximately $47 million. $47 million. The number was so astronomically large it felt utterly surreal. "He left it all to you," Mr. Foster continued, his voice calm. "Every penny. There's a letter he wrote explaining his reasons, if you'd like to read it." Zara's hands trembled as she took the envelope. Inside, a single sheet of paper covered in unfamiliar handwriting. "Zar, I know you have no reason to forgive me for leaving. I was 28 years old and scared of everything. Of being a father, of being responsible for your future, of failing you the way my own father failed me. I thought I was protecting you by staying away. I was wrong about everything except one thing. You were better off without me. Your mother raised you to be the kind of person I never was. Strong, honest, hardworking. I kept track of you over the years. I know about your marriage, about your divorce, about how hard you've been working to rebuild your life. I can't give you back the father you deserved, but I can give you the means to build the life you want. Use this money wisely. Use it to show the world what you're made of. I hope someday you can forgive a foolish old man who loved you more than he knew how to show. Theodore Johnson." Tears streamed down Zara's face before she finished reading, a tumultuous cocktail of anger, grief, and shock, so intertwined she couldn't distinguish one emotion from another. "There are properties all over the Midwest," Mr. Foster was saying, his voice a steady anchor in her swirling thoughts. "The main office is in Chicago, but there are holdings in Indianapolis, Milwaukee, Detroit, all managed by a very competent team, so you don't need to worry about the day-to-day operations immediately." "I don't know anything about running a business empire," Zara confessed, feeling utterly overwhelmed. "That's what advisors are for," Mr. Foster replied kindly. "Your father left instructions for a transition team to help you learn everything you need to know. But Miss Johnson, you should understand, this inheritance comes with no strings attached. If you want to sell everything and live quietly somewhere, that's your choice. If you want to take over the companies and expand them, that's also your choice." Choice. When was the last time she had real choices in her life? "What happens next?" she asked, her voice regaining a measure of control. "Next, you come to Chicago with me. We'll get you set up with the legal documents, introduce you to the management team, and start the process of transferring everything into your name. How soon can you be ready to travel?" Zara looked around her tiny apartment, the diner uniform hanging on the back of the door, the community college textbooks stacked on her small table, the meager, carefully constructed life she had been building, one painstaking step at a time. "Give me 2 hours," she said. She called in sick to work for the first time since starting at the diner. She packed a bag with the nicest clothes she owned, a collection that suddenly felt woefully inadequate. She left a note for Mrs. Chen, explaining a family emergency and promising to return soon. But as the lawyer's car pulled away from the bakery and headed toward the airport, Zara wondered if she would ever truly be back at all. The old Zara, the soft, agreeable woman, might have been utterly overwhelmed by this sudden, colossal change in fortune. She might have been too intimidated to claim what was rightfully hers. But the new Zara, the one forged in the fires of betrayal, tempered by poverty, and rebuilt painstakingly from nothing, was ready for whatever came next. And even then, as the city lights blurred behind her, she was already thinking about Brandon. A new kind of thinking, sharp and strategic. The penthouse office in downtown Chicago felt like stepping into a different dimension. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a breathtaking vista of Lake Michigan, and the conference table, grand and imposing, could seat 20 people with ease. Just months ago, Zara had been living above a bakery. Now she owned the building the bakery would have to pay rent to. "The quarterly reports show consistent growth across all properties," explained Margaret Russo, the chief financial officer, a woman who had worked with Theodore Johnson for 15 years and exuded an aura of calm competence. "Your father was conservative, but smart with his investments. No flashy risks, just solid returns year after year." Zara nodded, her mind a sponge, trying to absorb the relentless stream of information, property values, occupancy rates, development opportunities. It was like learning a new language, but one she was picking up with astonishing speed, surprising even herself. "What about the Patterson construction contract?" she inquired, flipping through a dense file, her voice betraying nothing. Margaret looked puzzled. "I'm not familiar with that name. Is it one of our smaller contractors?" "No. Zara said carefully, her gaze steady. "It's a company back home. I want to know if they do any work for our properties." She had been living in Chicago for 2 months now, immersing herself in the intricacies of the business, settling into a life of unimaginable luxury. Her father's penthouse apartment was 10 times larger than any space she had ever inhabited. She had hired a personal shopper, a necessity to curate a wardrobe befitting her new position. She had enrolled in an executive MBA program, a challenge that allowed her to learn while actively managing her burgeoning empire. But she hadn't forgotten where she came from, nor who had put her there. Every morning she woke up thinking about Brandon, not with the crushing, debilitating pain of the early days post-divorce, but with something sharper, more focused, a cold, strategic precision. She now possessed the resources to uncover every detail about his business, his clients, his contracts, his financial standing. What she discovered was, to her analytical mind, fascinating. Patterson Construction was struggling, a ship slowly taking on water. They had overextended themselves on several projects, leading to acute cash flow problems. Brandon had been forced to lay off half his crew, and a growing number of clients had jumped ship, fed up with delays and escalating costs. Rachel, it turned out, had abandoned him 6 months prior, lured away by a high-flying lawyer from Indianapolis who could provide the lavish lifestyle she so clearly coveted. According to the private investigator Zara had discreetly hired, Brandon was drinking too much and working too little. His business was hemorrhaging money, and his personal life was, by all accounts, a chaotic mess. Zara felt no satisfaction in his suffering. This wasn't about reveling in his misery. This was about wanting him to understand, with absolute clarity, that actions have consequences. "I want to expand our operations," she announced at the next board meeting, her voice calm and authoritative. "I believe there's significant opportunity in smaller markets that we haven't thoroughly explored yet." The senior staff exchanged cautious glances. Theodore Johnson, a titan in the Chicago real estate scene, had never shown interest in small-town properties. "What markets are you thinking about, Miss Johnson?" inquired James Wright, the seasoned head of acquisitions. "The Indianapolis area, perhaps some of the smaller cities surrounding it," Zara replied, meeting his gaze directly. "I want to research the construction companies operating in those regions, find out which ones are reliable and which ones we should definitively avoid." Within a week, a comprehensive file on Patterson Construction landed on her desk. It detailed payment delays, a litany of unhappy customers, substandard work on recent projects. Brandon, the reports confirmed, was desperate for new contracts, but his rapidly deteriorating reputation was making it nearly impossible to find clients willing to take the risk. This was Zara's opening. This was when she made her first strategic move. Johnson Properties, with a quiet, almost imperceptible maneuver, purchased the building where Patterson Construction rented their office space. Zara became Brandon's landlord, and he, in his arrogance and ignorance, remained completely oblivious. The rent increase notice was delivered on a Friday afternoon, a standard business practice. The new owners, the notice explained, were merely bringing all properties up to market rates. Nothing personal, just business. Except, of course, it was entirely personal. Zara was in her office that afternoon when Margaret Russo, her CFO, knocked on her door. "The Patterson Construction file you requested," Margaret said, placing a thick folder on Zara's desk. "They're 3 months behind on rent, and their credit rating has dropped significantly in the past year. Do you want me to start eviction proceedings?" "Not yet," Zara said, a ghost of a smile playing on her lips. "I want to give them a chance to catch up." Margaret looked surprised. The late Theodore Johnson, a shrewd and unsentimental businessman, would never have extended such a grace period to a failing enterprise. But Zara wasn't being generous. She was being strategic. She wanted Brandon to feel the tightening noose, to sense his world shrinking, becoming more precarious, but without understanding the hand that was orchestrating his downfall. Not yet. For now, she wanted him to feel the pressure without comprehending its source. That weekend, she drove back to her old hometown for the first time since inheriting her father's fortune. She had kept the apartment above the bakery as a subtle anchor to her past, but she chose to stay in the town's finest hotel, a conscious statement of her transformation. She wanted to observe how much everything had changed, and more importantly, how much she had changed. The answer, she found, was both. The town seemed smaller, more provincial than she remembered. The diner where she had worked, once a haven, now appeared cramped and dingy. The motel where she had resided after her divorce still radiated the desperate aura she had felt within its walls. But she, Zara, looked utterly different, moving through these familiar streets in designer clothes with a professional haircut and expensive shoes. People stared, but without recognition. The broken woman who had left town 8 months ago was gone, utterly erased. That night, she drove past the house she had once shared with Brandon. It looked dilapidated now, the lawn overgrown, paint peeling around the windows. A for sale sign stood forlornly in the front yard. Rachel's car was conspicuously absent from the driveway. Her research had confirmed it. Rachel was living with the Indianapolis lawyer, with no intention of returning to a man whose business was in free fall. Zara sat in her rental car, gazing at the house where she had been so cruelly betrayed and humiliated, where she had lost everything and been told she was nothing. She wasn't nothing anymore. She was just getting started. The private conference room at Johnson Properties overlooked the Chicago River. But Zara's attention was fixed not on the panoramic view, but on the files meticulously spread across the mahogany table. Each document represented a carefully calculated piece of her intricate plan. Patterson Construction owes approximately $200,000 in various debts, stated Daniel Kim, the forensic accountant she had hired, his voice crisp and precise. Unpaid suppliers, outstanding loans, and now 3 months back rent on their office space. They're essentially insolvent, but still operating. Barely, Zara interjected. Daniel nodded. They have 2 small projects keeping them afloat, but both clients are deeply unhappy with delays and quality issues. If those contracts are canceled, Patterson Construction will be forced into bankruptcy within 30 days. Zara made a note in her elegant leather portfolio. Everything, she thought with a surge of cold satisfaction, was falling into place exactly as she had planned. Over the past 6 months, she had quietly purchased the debt of several of Brandon's key suppliers. She now owned the company that provided his construction materials, the equipment rental business he relied on, and, of course, the building where his office was located. She controlled his entire business ecosystem, a puppet master pulling the strings, all without him ever knowing. But this was merely the foundation. The real plan, she knew, was far more sophisticated, far more devastating. What about the Montgomery Mall renovation project? She asked James Wright, her acquisitions director. We submitted a bid last week, James replied. It's exactly the kind of project Patterson Construction would normally pursue, but our offer is significantly more competitive. The Montgomery Mall project was the biggest construction undertaking in the region, valued at over $2 million. Brandon had been banking on landing that contract to rescue his sinking business. He had already secured loans against the anticipated income, made commitments to suppliers based on securing the job. He wasn't going to get it. Johnson Properties was going to secure the contract, and they would hire a construction company from Indianapolis to execute the work. A company with an impeccable reputation and a pricing structure 30% lower than Brandon could ever hope to match. There's something else, Margaret Russo added, sliding another file across the table. The Riverside office complex that Patterson Construction completed last year. There are significant structural problems. The city is requiring extensive repairs before they'll renew the occupancy permits. Zara looked up sharply. What kind of problems? Margaret's mouth tightened. Substandard materials, improper installation of key systems, the kind of shortcuts companies take when they're desperate to finish quickly and cheaply. This, Zara realized, was better than she had even hoped. Brandon's past mistakes were catching up to him, converging with her strategic blocking of his future opportunities. He wasn't just losing new business. His old business was becoming a colossal liability. Who owns the Riverside complex? She asked. Margaret smiled faintly. We do. We purchased it 3 weeks ago through one of our subsidiary companies. perfect. Zara now owned the very building that would force Brandon to fix his shoddy work at his own expense. Work he couldn't afford to do and absolutely couldn't afford not to do. "How much will the repairs cost?" Zara asked. "Conservative estimate, $500,000. Brandon, according to Daniel's meticulously compiled financial reports, barely had $50,000 to his name. Zara closed the files, leaning back in her chair. 6 months of careful, calculated planning was about to pay off. Brandon Patterson, the man who had dismissed her as nothing, was about to discover in the most profound and painful way what nothing truly felt like. But she wasn't finished yet. The business destruction was only one facet of her carefully sculpted revenge. She wanted Brandon to see her success. She wanted him to grasp with agonizing clarity exactly who he had thrown away and the astronomical cost of his betrayal. "I want to host a charity gala," she announced, the words echoing in the vast office. "Something high profile, something that will command attention in the local media. I want to invite everyone from the old hometown. Business leaders, politicians, anyone who matters." Her staff exchanged glances, a subtle ripple of surprise. Theodore Johnson had always been a reclusive businessman, uninterested in social events or public recognition. "What charity did you have in mind, Miss Johnson?" Margaret inquired, ever pragmatic. "Something for divorced women starting over," Zara stated, her voice devoid of irony. "Women who have been left with nothing and need help rebuilding their lives." The symbolism was too exquisitely perfect to resist. "We'll need to rent a venue," James commented, already making notes. "Somewhere impressive that can accommodate a large crowd." "I have the perfect place in mind," Zara said, a slow, deliberate smile spreading across her face. "The Grand Ballroom at the Riverside Hotel." It was elegant, expensive, and, crucially, it was exactly where Brandon and Rachel had hosted their lavish engagement party, just weeks after Zara's divorce had been finalized. Some revenge, Zara had always believed, was best served cold. But her revenge, she mused, was going to be served at precisely the right temperature to burn. She was going to return to her hometown not as the broken, discarded woman who had fled, but as the most formidable businesswoman the region had ever seen. She would stand in the very room where Brandon had celebrated her destruction, and she would show everyone, especially him, exactly what he had lost. And then she would finish destroying what remained of his life. The only lingering question was whether Brandon would even be able to afford a ticket to witness his own downfall. The grand ballroom of the Riverside Hotel had never looked more magnificent. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm, inviting glow over tables draped in ivory silk, and the air was perfumed with the delicate scent of white orchids. 300 of the region's most influential people had gathered for the inaugural gala of the Phoenix Foundation, Zara's new charity dedicated to helping women rebuild their lives after divorce. Zara stood at the entrance, greeting guests, and to her quiet satisfaction, no one recognized her. The woman shaking hands with the mayor and the bank president bore no resemblance to the defeated, heartbroken individual who had left town 10 months prior. Her hair was swept into an elegant updo, showcasing diamond earrings that shimmered with understated brilliance. Her black evening gown, custom-made, represented more than she used to earn in 3 months. Her handshake was firm, her smile confident, and her eyes held the kind of power that emanated from knowing precisely who you were and what you were worth. "Miss Johnson, thank you for bringing this incredible event to our community," gushed Patricia Walsh, the city's economic development director. "We're always thrilled to welcome successful business leaders who are committed to giving back." "It's my pleasure," Zara replied smoothly. "This community shaped who I am. It's profoundly important to me that other women here have the support they need to rebuild their lives." She had been back in town for 3 days, occupying the hotel's presidential suite, conducting meetings with local business leaders. The story in the regional newspaper had painted her as a Chicago real estate mogul with local roots, hinting at major investments in the area. No one connected her to the Zara Patterson who had worked at Murphy's Diner and lived above a bakery, except for Gordon Price, her old lawyer, who had approached her earlier in the evening, his eyes welling with tears. "I can't believe this is really you, he had whispered, grasping her hand. "When I heard the name Johnson, I wondered, but I never imagined. It's really me, Gordon," Zara had said, squeezing his hand, "just with a few more resources than I had before." Now she waited, the culmination of months of meticulous planning drawing near. Brandon would be here tonight. She had made sure of it. The invitation, subtly irresistible, had been sent to Patterson Construction, listing it among local businesses invited to participate. The ticket price was steep enough to sting his already precarious cash flow, but not so prohibitive that his bruised pride would allow him to miss the social event of the year. "Ladies and gentlemen," the hotel manager's voice boomed through the ballroom, "if you would please take your seats, dinner will be served shortly." Zara moved gracefully through the crowd towards the head table, accepting compliments on the flawless event, discussing the Phoenix Foundation's vital mission. She had studied every nuance of how to present herself in this new world, how to speak, how to move, how to command respect without ever demanding it. And then she saw him. Brandon stood near the bar, looking disheveled, wearing a rented tuxedo that didn't quite fit. His face looked older, more worn than she remembered, etched with lines that hadn't been there during their marriage. His hair, once thick and dark, was visibly thinning. He was utterly alone. Zara watched him scan the crowd, his eyes darting restlessly, searching for someone important, someone who might throw a lifeline to his failing business. His desperation was palpable, evident in the slumped set of his shoulders, the restless movement of his gaze from person to person. She took her time approaching him, savoring the moment, imprinting every detail of the dawning realization on his face into her memory. "Brandon," she said, her voice a silken whisper, appearing at his elbow as if she had materialized from his deepest nightmares. He turned, and his face went completely blank, the blood draining from it. Then his eyes widened, his mouth falling open as if he were seeing a ghost. "Zara." The word was barely a breath. "What are you? How are you here?" "I'm here because it's my event," she finished smoothly, her voice calm and authoritative. "I'm the founder of the Phoenix Foundation." He stared at her, utterly bewildered, as if she were speaking a foreign language. His eyes traveled from her diamond earrings to her designer gown, to the way every person in the room seemed to know exactly who she was. "I don't understand," he stammered. You were working at a diner." "Living in a tiny apartment, struggling to pay my bills," Zara supplied, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. "Yes," he said, still staring, utterly dumbfounded. "How did you—" "I inherited my father's real estate empire," she said casually, a master of understatement. "It's amazing how much your life can change when you discover you're worth $47 million. The color drained completely from Brandon's face. Behind him, Zara could see other guests beginning to notice their hushed, intense conversation, whispering amongst themselves. $47 million, he repeated, the words hollow. "Well, it's grown since then," Zara said, her smile broadening, though still devoid of warmth. "Smart investments, good management, you know how it is with money. It tends to multiply when you know what you're doing with it." Brandon's hand trembled as he lifted his drink to his lips. "I had no idea about your father." "Of course you didn't," Zara said, a hint of steel entering her voice. "You never asked about my family. You were too busy planning your future with Rachel." At the mention of Rachel's name, Brandon flinched visibly. "Zara, I know I hurt you. I know I made mistakes." "Mistakes?" she interrupted, her voice still perfectly pleasant, yet with an edge that could cut glass. "Is that what we're calling it now?" Other guests were definitely watching now. The mayor's wife had paused her conversation, openly listening. The president of the Chamber of Commerce was unabashedly staring. "Can we talk privately?" Brandon pleaded desperately. "Please." "Oh, we'll have plenty of time to talk," Zara said, a chilling promise in her tone. "But right now, I need to welcome my guests and explain why this foundation matters so much to me. You see, I know what it's like to have everything taken away by someone you trusted. I know what it's like to be told you're worth nothing. And I know what it's like to discover that you're actually worth everything." She touched his arm lightly, a gesture that appeared friendly to onlookers, but felt like a lethal threat to Brandon. "Enjoy your dinner," she said. "We'll catch up soon." She turned and walked away, towards the podium, leaving Brandon standing by the bar, his mouth still agape, his entire world crumbling around him. The revenge, Zara knew, was just beginning. The morning after the gala, Zara sat in the hotel's restaurant, savoring her coffee and scanning the local newspaper. The headline made her smile. "Chic mogul brings glamour and philanthropy to local scene." The article, generously illustrated, featured several photos of her addressing the crowd and mingling with guests. In one photograph, she could be seen talking to Brandon near the bar. The caption beneath it read, "Johnson chats with local business leaders about potential partnerships." Partnership. The irony was delicious. If only they knew the true nature of their partnership. Her phone had been ringing incessantly all morning, with interview requests and business propositions. Everyone, it seemed, wanted a piece of the mysterious heiress who had descended upon their community like a fairy godmother with deep pockets and ambitious plans. Everyone, that is, except the one person she was most keen to see. At precisely 10 o'clock, a crisp knock sounded at her hotel room door. She had been expecting it. Brandon stood in the hallway, looking utterly disheveled, as if he hadn't slept a wink. His clothes were rumpled, his eyes red-rimmed. He had likely spent the entire night struggling to process the seismic shift in his reality, the revelation from the gala. "We need to talk," he said, skipping any preamble. "Do we?" Zara asked, not inviting him in, her voice cool and measured. "I thought we covered everything last night." "Please," he said, and the desperation in his voice was so raw, so unvarnished, it almost made her feel a pang of pity. Almost. "I know you hate me. I know I destroyed everything between us, but we were married for 5 years. That has to count for something." Zara studied his face for a long moment, allowing the silence to stretch, to amplify his discomfort. Then she stepped aside, granting him entry into the opulent suite. Brandon walked into the sitting room and stopped short, his eyes wide with awe and something akin to disbelief. The space was considerably larger than the entire house they had once shared during their marriage. The furniture was elegant, expensive, and fresh flowers, exquisitely arranged, filled crystal vases on every surface. Through the towering floor-to-ceiling windows, the entire downtown area stretched out below, a glittering tapestry of commerce and life. "This is incredible," he breathed, his voice a mixture of wonder and what might have been genuine regret. "It's comfortable," Zara said, settling into one of the plush leather armchairs. "Would you like coffee? Room service here is excellent." "Zara, I'm so sorry," Brandon blurted out, ignoring her offer, dropping onto the couch across from her. "I was an idiot. A selfish, cruel idiot. If I had known about your father, if you had known I was worth millions, you wouldn't have cheated on me," Zara interrupted, her voice flat, devoid of emotion. "You wouldn't have humiliated me and thrown me away like garbage." "That's not what I meant," Brandon said quickly, his denials flimsy and unconvincing. "I mean, yes, but so your apology is conditional on my net worth?" Zara interjected, a cold smile playing on her lips. "How refreshing. At least you're consistent." Brandon buried his head in his hands, his posture one of utter defeat. "I don't know what to say. I don't know how to fix this." "You can't, Brandon," Zara said simply, her voice gentle yet unyielding. "Some things can't be fixed. Some bridges can't be rebuilt after you burn them down." "But we could try," he said, looking up at her, a flicker of desperate hope in his eyes. "We could start over. We're different people now. We both learn things." "You're right," Zara agreed, her gaze unwavering. "We are different people. I'm stronger, smarter, and infinitely wealthier." She let her eyes travel over his rumpled appearance, his desperate demeanor. "And you're exactly the same. Still selfish, still only interested in what benefits you." "That's not fair," Brandon protested, a last-ditch effort at self-preservation. "You don't know what I've been through this past year." "Actually, I do," Zara said, reaching for a folder on the side table, the gesture deliberate and precise. "I know everything about what you've been through." She opened the folder, her voice taking on a detached, almost clinical tone as she began to read from the top document. Patterson Construction currently owes $47,000 in back rent, $89,000 to various suppliers, $127,000 in outstanding loans. Your credit rating has dropped to 487. You've laid off 18 employees in the past 8 months. 3 former clients are pursuing legal action for breach of contract. Brandon's face went white, draining of all color. How do you know all that? Rachel left you 6 months ago for a lawyer in Indianapolis who drives a BMW and owns a lake house, Zara continued, relentless. She took the diamond bracelet you gave her, the one you originally gave me for our anniversary, and she's been telling people that dating you was the biggest mistake of her life. Stop, Brandon whispered weakly. Your house is in foreclosure. Your truck has been repossessed. You're living in a studio apartment above Murphy's Auto Repair and drinking too much. Should I go on? Brandon stared at her as if she were a stranger, which Zara supposed she was. Why do you know all this? He asked, his voice barely audible. Because I needed to understand the scope of your failure before I decided how much of it was my responsibility. Your responsibility? Brandon echoed, bewildered. Zara closed the folder and set it aside. Did you really think this was all a coincidence, Brandon? That your business started failing right around the time I inherited my fortune? That every door you tried to open suddenly slammed shut? That every opportunity you counted on simply vanished? Understanding dawned slowly in Brandon's eyes, a horrifying realization spreading across his face. What are you saying? I'm saying that I own your office building, Zara said, her voice calm, utterly devoid of triumph. I own the companies that supply your materials. I own the debt on your equipment loans. I submitted the winning bid for the Montgomery Mall project that you were counting on to save your business. Brandon stood up so quickly he nearly toppled over. You've been destroying my life on purpose. I've been giving you exactly what you gave me, Brandon, Zara said. Nothing. This is insane, Brandon shouted, starting to pace frantically around the opulent room. This is psychotic. You can't just ruin someone's life because you're angry about a divorce. Can't I? Zara asked, raising an eyebrow. I have 47 million reasons why I can do whatever I want. I'll fight this, Brandon raged, his voice growing louder, more frantic. I'll expose what you're doing. I'll tell everyone. Tell them what? Zara challenged. That a successful businesswoman made better offers than a failing contractor? That she chose not to do business with someone who had a history of poor quality work and unreliable service? That she invested in profitable ventures instead of propping up incompetent companies? Brandon stopped pacing, staring at her, his rage slowly deflating into despair. You've planned all of this for months, he stated, a chilling certainty in his voice. Zara confirmed it. Every move, every purchase, every decision. I wanted you to feel exactly what I felt when you destroyed my life. Helpless, hopeless, like everything you thought you could count on was disappearing, and there was nothing you could do to stop it. But we loved each other once, Brandon, he pleaded desperately, clutching at straws. We were happy. We had good times. We had lies, Zara corrected him, her voice firm. You were cheating on me for 2 years, remember? Planning your exit while I was planning our future. Everything I thought we had was built on deception. Brandon sank back onto the couch, his fight utterly gone. What do you want from me? Nothing, Zara said. I don't want anything from you, Brandon. That's the point. You have nothing I want. You never did. The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken truths and shattered illusions. Outside the windows, the city of Chicago continued its relentless hum, unaware of the profound drama unfolding 40 floors above. What happens now? Brandon asked finally, his voice barely a whisper. Now you reap what you sowed, Brandon, Zara said, just like I did. She stood up, walked to the door, and opened it, a silent but unmistakable invitation for him to leave. Goodbye, Brandon, she said. I won't be seeing you again. As the door closed behind him, Zara felt something she hadn't expected to feel. Not triumph, not elation, just an unsettling emptiness. 3 weeks later, Zara sat in her Chicago office, reading the local newspaper's business section. The headline made her smile, a genuine, if fleeting, smile. Patterson Construction files for bankruptcy. Owner cites unforeseen market changes. The article was brief, to the point. Brandon's company had officially closed its doors, unable to secure new contracts and defaulting on its existing debts. All remaining employees had been laid off. The business assets would be liquidated to pay creditors. There was no mention of his personal struggles in the paper, but Zara's private investigator had diligently provided those details in his weekly report. Brandon had moved back in with his mother, residing in a trailer park on the edge of town. He was working part-time at a hardware store, earning $12 an hour. His truck had been repossessed, so he now rode a bicycle to work. Rachel, upon hearing about his bankruptcy, had called him once, according to phone records Zara's team had access to. The call lasted 3 minutes. She never called again. Zara should have felt triumphant. This was what she had meticulously worked towards for almost a year. Brandon Patterson, the man who had told her she was nothing, who had humiliated her and callously cast her aside, was now living the very kind of desperate existence he had forced her into. But instead of triumph, she felt empty. The revenge had been perfect, complete, devastating in its execution. And now that it was over, Zara realized a profound truth. Destroying Brandon hadn't actually healed the wounds he had inflicted upon her. It hadn't erased the searing pain of his betrayal, nor had it magically restored her ability to trust. It had simply added another complex layer to her already tumultuous story. Her assistant's gentle knock on her office door broke the silence. "Miss Johnson, there's someone here to see you. She says she knows you from your hometown." Zara looked up, curious. Very few people from her old life knew her current address. The woman who entered her office was thin and nervous, her bleached blonde hair and too much makeup attempting, unsuccessfully, to hide the lines of worry around her eyes. It took Zara a moment to fully recognize her. "Rachel." "Hello, Zara," Rachel said, hovering near the doorway as if poised for immediate flight. "Thank you for seeing me." "I haven't agreed to see you yet," Zara said coolly, her voice betraying nothing. "What do you want?" Rachel moved closer to the desk, clutching a worn purse against her chest, a stark contrast to the designer bags she once flaunted. "I wanted to apologize for everything," she began, her voice barely above a whisper. "For what we did to you, for how we treated you. It was wrong, and I'm truly sorry." Zara studied the woman who had once been her replacement, a shadow of her former self. Rachel looked desperate, defeated. Her clothes were cheap and ill-fitting, her shoes scuffed and worn. This wasn't the confident, polished secretary who had stolen Zara's husband. "Are you?" Zara asked, her gaze piercing. "Sorry, I mean, or are you just sorry that your choices led to consequences you don't like?" Rachel's face flushed, a mottled red beneath her makeup. "I know you have no reason to believe me, but I really am sorry. What we did was cruel. You didn't deserve any of it." "No," Zara agreed, her voice flat. "But you did it anyway." "Yes," Rachel said quietly, her head bowed. "We did." They sat in silence for a moment. Outside the windows, the sprawling metropolis of Chicago stretched endlessly in all directions, teeming with millions of people living their lives, completely oblivious to the small, intense drama playing out 40 floors above them. "The lawyer dumped me," Rachel said suddenly, the words tumbling out in a rush. 6 months ago, for someone younger, someone who looked better on his arm at business dinners. "I'm sorry to hear that," Zara said, and was surprised to find that she genuinely meant it. "I tried to go back to Brandon, but his business was already falling apart. And now," Rachel gestured helplessly, her hand sweeping through the air, "I heard about what happened to his company, about what you did." Zara didn't reply, her expression unreadable. "I'm not here to ask you to help him," Rachel continued quickly, anticipating the rejection. "I know you won't, and honestly, I don't blame you. I'm not even here to ask you to help me, although God knows I could use it." "Then why are you here?" Zara pressed, intrigued. Rachel met her eyes for the first time since entering the office, a raw vulnerability in her gaze. "Because I wanted you to know that destroying us didn't make you happy. I can see it in your face. You won, but you're not happy." The words hit Zara harder than she expected. She had believed her emotional emptiness was meticulously hidden behind her professional composure, her carefully constructed facade of success. Happiness wasn't the goal, Zara said carefully, choosing her words with precision. "What was the goal?" Rachel asked. "Justice," Zara said immediately, the word resonating with a deep internal truth. "Balance, making sure actions had consequences. And now that you have all of that?" Zara didn't answer. Rachel stood up slowly, a sad, knowing look in her eyes. "I hope you find whatever you're really looking for," she said, her voice softer now, tinged with a quiet wisdom Zara hadn't expected. "I hope you find a way to be happy that doesn't depend on anyone else being miserable." After Rachel left, Zara sat alone in her office for a long time. Outside, the sun was setting over Lake Michigan, painting the sky in brilliant hues of orange and pink. It was beautiful, but she barely noticed. She had won absolutely and completely. Brandon was ruined. Rachel was alone and struggling. Everyone who had hurt her was paying the price for what they had done. So why, Zara pondered, did victory feel so much like defeat? Her phone buzzed, a text from Adrienne, the kind, intelligent man she had been dating for the past 3 months. They were supposed to have dinner tonight, but she had been so consumed by the final stages of her revenge that she hadn't been fully present in their relationship. "Still on for tonight? I found a new place I think you'll love." Zara looked at the message for a long moment. Adrienne knew nothing of her meticulously orchestrated revenge against Brandon. He knew her as a successful businesswoman, a philanthropist building a foundation to empower women in crisis. He saw her as someone who used her vast resources to lift people up, not to tear them down. Maybe, she thought, it was time to become that person for real. She texted back, "Yes, can't wait to see you." The chapter of her life that had been defined by Brandon Patterson was finally, unequivocally, closed. It was time to write a new chapter, one about the woman she truly wanted to become. 1 year later, Zara stood in front of the Phoenix Foundation's magnificent new headquarters, watching construction crews put the finishing touches on the building's facade. The center, a beacon of hope and empowerment, would provide job training, counseling services, and temporary housing for women rebuilding their lives after divorce or domestic violence. It was the first project that had made her feel truly, profoundly proud of her wealth. "It's beautiful," Adrienne murmured, slipping his hand into hers as they watched the workers meticulously install the bronze plaque by the front entrance. "Your father would be proud." Zara squeezed his hand and smiled. Adrienne had proposed 3 months ago, and she had said yes without hesitation. Not because she needed him to complete her, but because she wanted to share the rich, meaningful life she had built with someone who understood and appreciated both her strength and her quiet vulnerability. He knew the whole story now, about Brandon, about her revenge, about the years she had spent meticulously destroying the people who had hurt her. He didn't judge her for it, but he also didn't celebrate it. He simply accepted it as an indelible part of the arduous journey that had ultimately led her to him. "I think he would be," she agreed, looking up at the imposing building. "I think he'd be happy that I found a way to use his legacy for something positive." The Phoenix Foundation had already helped 67 women embark on new lives. Some were learning invaluable job skills. Others were completing their education, pursuing long-deferred dreams. Still others were launching their own small businesses, fueled by modest loans from the Foundation's fund. Each success story, each testament to renewed hope and agency, felt like irrefutable proof that Zara had finally discovered her true purpose. Her phone buzzed, a text from Margaret back at the office. "The Detroit property deal closed. Congratulations. You just added another $12 million to your net worth." Zara read the message, feeling the familiar satisfaction of a successful business transaction. But it was different now. The money, she realized, was a tool, not a trophy. She was building something that would last, something that would resonate long after she was gone. "Good news?" Adrienne asked, noticing her faint smile. "Very good news," she confirmed. "It means we can fund the scholarship program we talked about." They walked towards their car, passing a group of women attending job training classes in the temporary building next door. One of them, a young mother named Lisa, who had fled an abusive marriage with nothing but the clothes on her back, now training to be a medical assistant, waved at Zara. "Miss Johnson, thank you again for everything," Lisa called out, her voice filled with genuine gratitude. Zara waved back, feeling a profound warmth emanating from the knowledge that her resources were genuinely changing real lives in meaningful, tangible ways. As they drove through downtown, they passed a construction site where a gleaming new office building was rising. The sign proudly proclaimed it a Johnson Properties development, but Zara felt no need to point it out. Her success no longer required external recognition or validation. It simply was. "Have you heard anything about Brandon lately?" Adrienne asked carefully, only broaching the topic of her ex-husband when Zara seemed ready to discuss it, which wasn't often. "Gordon mentioned he's working for a landscaping company now," Zara said, a quiet reflection in her voice. "Steady work, honest work. I think he's doing better." She had stopped having Brandon followed 6 months ago. The private investigator's reports had slowly shifted from satisfying to simply depressing. Brandon was working hard at his new job, had stopped drinking, and was slowly, painstakingly paying back the debts he could manage. He lived quietly, no longer bothering anyone. He had learned his lesson, Zara realized, and she no longer needed to keep teaching it to him. "Any regrets?" Adrienne asked, his gaze gentle and probing. Zara considered the question seriously. Did she regret spending a year of her life so intensely focused on revenge, instead of immediately channeling that energy into building something positive? Did she regret the immense time and energy she had poured into meticulously dismantling people who, in many ways, had already destroyed themselves through their own poor choices? "Some," she said honestly, the word hanging in the air. "I wish I had found my father's letter sooner. I wish I had discovered my own strength without needing to prove it by tearing other people down. But I don't regret learning that I am capable of fighting back fiercely when someone tries to destroy me." They pulled into the parking lot of their favorite restaurant, the small, cozy Italian place where they had shared their first date. The owner, Mrs. Martinelli, greeted them like cherished family, leading them to their usual table by the window. As they settled in, menus they had long ago memorized in hand, Zara looked around the bustling, intimate dining room, filled with couples and families enjoying their evening meals. This, she realized, was what happiness truly looked like. Not the dramatic, fleeting satisfaction of victory over enemies, but the quiet, profound contentment of building a life with someone you loved and engaging in work that genuinely mattered. "I've been thinking," Adrienne said over their appetizer, his eyes sparkling with anticipation, "about the wedding. I know we talked about having it here in Chicago, but would you consider having it back in your hometown instead?" Zara looked at him in surprise, a flicker of apprehension in her eyes. "Why would you want that?" "Because that's where your story truly began," he said, taking her hand across the table. "Both the painful parts and the parts that made you strong. It seems like the right place to start our new story together." The idea would have been unthinkable a year ago, returning to the very place where she had been humiliated and utterly broken, to celebrate her profound happiness, for everyone to witness. But now, the thought didn't fill her with dread or anger. It filled her with something else entirely, something akin to a deep, abiding peace. "You know what?" she said, raising her wine glass, a genuine, unburdened smile lighting her face. "I think that's perfect." They were interrupted by Mrs. Martinelli, who approached their table with a chilled bottle of champagne. "This is from the gentleman at the corner table," she said, pointing to an elderly man dining alone. "He said to tell you, congratulations on your engagement and on all the good work you're doing." Zara looked over at the stranger and nodded her thanks. She didn't recognize him, but apparently her burgeoning reputation for philanthropy was starting to precede her. This recognition felt different, profoundly different, from the attention she had sought during her campaign of revenge. This was about what she was building, not what she had painstakingly torn down. As they walked back to her apartment that evening, Adrienne stopped suddenly and pulled her into his arms for a kiss. They stood on the bustling sidewalk in front of a fragrant flower shop, surrounded by the vibrant noise and energy of the city. But for a suspended moment, it felt as if they were the only two people in the entire world. "What was that for?" Zara asked when they finally broke apart. "For being exactly who you are," Adrienne said, his gaze warm and sincere. "For being strong enough to survive betrayal, smart enough to build an empire, and wise enough to know that revenge isn't the same thing as justice." "And what's the difference?" Zara asked, though deep down she already knew the answer, felt it in her very bones. "Justice heals the wound," Adrienne said, his voice soft but resonant. "Revenge just creates new ones." Zara smiled, a true, unburdened smile, and took his hand as they continued walking. She had learned that lesson the hard way, through fire and ashes, but she had learned it completely, unequivocally. Behind them, the dazzling lights of Chicago stretched endlessly in all directions, full of countless people starting over, building new lives, and discovering what they were truly capable of when their backs were against the wall. Zara had been one of those people once, broken and left for nothing. Now she was someone who actively helped others find their own strength, forge their own paths, and create their own happy endings. It was a far, far better story than the one she had originally planned.